My name is Amy Calloway. I am 34 years old. And on a Friday evening in April, I sat at my parents' dining room table, in a cream blouse I had ironed that morning, in a hotel room in downtown Chicago, watched my brother Ryan stand and lift his glass to a room of 22 people, and listened to my father say, into that warm, gathered quiet, "This is what we raised, a son who builds things." He said it the way men say things they believe to be complete truths, fully, without checking the room for the people the sentence was leaving out. 22 people raised their glasses. My mother pressed her fingers to her lips. My Aunt Carol made a sound that was something between a gasp and a prayer. Ryan smiled, the smile of a man who has never once wondered if the room agreed. I raised my glass. I smiled. I said nothing, because my phone was face down on the table beside my plate, and it had been buzzing for 11 minutes. And I already knew who was calling, and I already knew what they needed. And I was waiting, the way I have always waited, for exactly the right moment. But before I go any further, welcome to Velvet Revenge Stories. This channel is for women who were told to be realistic, who were handed smaller rooms, not because they were smaller people, but because someone in their life was too comfortable with the arrangement to change it. If someone has ever raised a glass to the person beside you and called it a toast to the family, this one is for you. Drop a comment, hit the subscribe button, and stay with me. Because what happened when I finally picked up that phone, at that table, in that room, in front of those 22 people, is the reason I am telling this story. I need a backup. All the way to a garage in Evanston, Illinois, where a man named Amy Calloway spent 31 years inventing things nobody asked him to invent, and building things nobody had thought to build yet, and writing everything down in a leather journal with a drafting compass clipped to the front cover. My grandfather, Edmund, had 11 patents. Not household names, not the kind of patents that end up on magazine covers. The kind that live inside other things: a tension mechanism in a medical device, a compression method in early data storage, a sealing process used in aerospace components that is still in production today. He was 73 years old when he died. He died in his garage, not dramatically. He sat down in his chair, between the workbench and the window, and simply did not get up. The drafting compass was in his shirt pocket. They found him the way you find someone who has been exactly where they belong for the last time. Edmund gave me the compass on a Sunday afternoon in June, when I was 11 years old. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it, and looked at me with the specific attention of a man who is deciding which person in a room most needs to hear what he is about to say. He said, "Ideas are the only things they cannot take from you. You can lose a house, you can lose a business, you can lose money 10 different ways before breakfast. But an idea that is properly protected," he tapped the compass against my closed fist, "that is yours, permanently, irrevocably, forever." I was 11, and I did not fully understand what irrevocably meant. I looked it up that evening in the dictionary my mother kept on the bottom shelf of the hallway bookcase, incapable of being retracted or altered. I wrote it in the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. I still have that notebook, I still have the compass. I am a partner at Calloway and Vance LLP. I want you to notice that I share a name with the firm, not because my family built anything there, because I did. I specialize in intellectual property law, patent prosecution, licensing agreements, and IP litigation. I find ideas that belong to one person and make sure the law agrees with that fact, in language so precise and so thoroughly documented that no amount of money or ambition or oversight can make it otherwise. I have been doing this for 9 years. I am very good at it. My family knows I am a lawyer. My mother introduces me at gatherings with a single phrase, "Amy does something with patents," delivered with a particular smile of someone describing a hobby they find mildly impressive, but difficult to explain. My father has never asked what a patent prosecution looks like. My brother, Ryan, has in 9 years asked me exactly one question about my work. He asked me at Christmas 2019 whether patents were hard to get. I said, "Depends on the idea." He nodded. He went back to his phone. I noted it. I said nothing. I went back to the green beans. Let me tell you about Ryan. Ryan Calloway is 31 years old. He has my father's confidence and my mother's ability to make a room feel like it was arranged for him before he arrived. He is genuinely charming. This is important to say. He is not performing charm. He simply has it the way some people have height, naturally, without effort, and slightly unaware of how much space it takes up. Ryan started his first company at 24, an app, a task management platform for small creative teams. It was decent. It did not scale. He started his second company at 27, a marketplace, online, regional, something with local artisans. It was charming the way Ryan was charming: good ideas, insufficient infrastructure, enthusiastic investors who ran out of patience in month 19. My parents funded portions of both. I know this not because they told me, but because my father asked me in 2021 to review some documents related to a small business loan, and the documents had Ryan's company name on them and my father's signature as the guarantor. I reviewed the documents, noted what I saw, and signed where I was asked to sign. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was that a guarantor on a loan for a company with this margin profile and this burn rate was making a specific kind of bet. What I was thinking was that I had seen this structure in litigation, and it did not typically end the way the guarantor intended. But my father did not ask what I was thinking. He asked me to review the documents. I reviewed the documents. Ryan's third company was called Luma, a workflow intelligence platform. He pitched it to me at Thanksgiving 2022 with the energy of a man who has finally found the thing he was supposed to build. He talked for 22 minutes without stopping. I ate my turkey, and I asked 2 questions. He answered one of them and redirected the other. By February 2023, he had seed funding, $300,000 from a small Chicago-based fund. By July 2023, he had a working product. By January of this year, he had $8 million in series of funding from Meridian Capital Partners, one of the 3 largest venture capital firms in the Midwest. My parents called me on the day the term sheet was signed. My father's voice had the particular brightness of a man who has been vindicated in something he was not sure he was right about. He said, "Ryan did it. $8 million, Amy, $8 million. My mother was on the extension. I could hear her smiling. I said, "That's wonderful." And I meant it because it was wonderful. And because I already knew something my father did not know yet, something I had known for approximately 6 weeks, something that was sitting in a folder on my desk in my office in Chicago, waiting for exactly the right moment to become the most important document in the room. I found it in February. The way I find most things, not by looking for it specifically, but by being the kind of person who reads everything and recognizes when something is not where it is supposed to be. A colleague sent me a technology brief, routine distribution. We receive them weekly, which include emerging platforms, new patent filings, licensing activity, and potential conflict flags. I was reading mine on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I was a third of the way through. And then I stopped. I went back to it. I read it again. The brief described a workflow intelligence platform using a proprietary methodology for task prioritization and resource allocation across distributed creative teams. It described the core function, the architecture of the approach, the specific way the system identified bottlenecks and rerouted work without human input. I set my coffee down. I opened a different folder on my desk, a client file, Castor Dynamics, a software company out of Boston. I had prosecuted their patent in 2021, patent number US 11-247382. A system and method for autonomous workflow optimization in distributed creative environments. I pulled the claim language. I put it beside the brief. I read them together. The way you read 2 things when you already sense the conclusion and are simply building the documentation to support it. The architecture was not similar. It wasn't inspired by. It wasn't adjacent to. It was the same. The methodology described in the brief, the specific sequence, the specific triggers, the specific allocation logic, was a direct implementation of claims 1 through 7 of patent US 11-247382. I sat very still for a moment. I thought about Edmund, about the compass in my desk drawer, about irrevocably. Then I opened my laptop. I pulled the Luma product documentation. It was public on their website. Ryan had written it himself. I recognized his voice in it, his particular way of making technical things sound accessible and warm. I read every word. I cross-referenced every function. against the patent claims. By noon, I had a memo. 4 pages. Precise. Well documented. The kind of memo that does not require interpretation. It simply shows you 2 things side by side and trusts you to understand what you are looking at. I sent it to my partner, Margaret Vance. She called me at 2:15. She read the first sentence. Then she was quiet. For a moment, that said more than most sentences do. Then she said, "Amy, does Ryan know?" I held my pen. I said, "No, he doesn't." She said, "Does he know what he billed on?" I said, "I don't think so." Margaret was quiet again. Then she said, "Is this going to be a problem for you?" I understood what she was asking. I said, "It's going to be a conversation." She said, "When?" I said, "When the time is right." She said, "The time is usually right before the Series A closes." I said, "I know, but it hasn't closed yet, and I need to think about how this goes." She accepted that. Margaret has known me for 9 years. She knows the difference between hesitation and preparation. I put the memo in a folder, labeled it, and put it in my desk drawer next to Edmund's compass. And I waited for the dinner invitation. It came 3 weeks later. Cream cardstock. My mother's handwriting. Friday the 14th. Celebrate Ryan and Luma's success. Family dinner. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I was not late. I am never late. I want to stop here because I need to say something before I tell you what happened at that table. I want to be clear about what I was not doing. I was not planning a scene. I was not building to a moment of public exposure. I was not carrying the memo to dinner to hurt my brother in front of our family. I am an intellectual property attorney. I understand better than almost anyone what it means when someone builds something on a foundation they do not own. It happens more than people think. A developer implements a methodology without knowing its provenance. A startup moves fast, and the due diligence on prior art is not as thorough as it should have been. These situations are resolved. They are resolved through licensing, through negotiation, through the kind of conversation that lawyers have with other lawyers in conference rooms on Tuesday afternoons over bad coffee. They are not resolved at dinner tables. They are not resolved in front of families. What I was carrying to that dinner was not a weapon. It was a document. And the document was going to be necessary, regardless of what happened at the table, because the Series A term sheet required IP clearance certification, and IP clearance certification required a conversation with Castor Dynamics, and Castor Dynamics was my client. What I did not anticipate, what I could not have anticipated, was that Meridian Capital partners had already found it. Not through me, through their own due diligence team. Their IP counsel had flagged the conflict 3 days earlier. The managing partner at Meridian, a man named David Kwan, had been trying to reach someone at Calloway and Vance for 48 hours. The calls had gone to our general line. Our general line routes to a coordinator on Thursdays and Fridays. Our coordinator had left me a voicemail I had not yet retrieved because I had driven directly from the airport to my parents' house in Evanston. So, I want you to hold all of that while I tell you about Ryan's toast, and about the phone face down beside my plate, and about the 11 minutes of buzzing that I sat through while my father said, "This is what we raised," and 22 people lifted their glasses. If you have ever been the person in a room full of celebration who already knows something the room does not, drop a comment below. Tell me what that feels like. Hit subscribe, because what happened next is the reason this story exists. The toast ended. The room settled into the warm sound of 22 people reaching for their forks and their wine and each other's attention. My mother was moving between the kitchen and the table with the particular efficiency of a woman for whom a successful dinner party is its own form of love. Ryan was at the head of the table. He was talking to my Uncle Peter about the Series A, the term sheet, the timeline, the vision. The words were clean and confident. Ryan's words are always clean and confident. He has never once been in a room where the words failed him. My phone buzzed again, face down, beside my salad fork. I looked at the screen without picking it up. Meridian Capital Partners, the 4th call in 11 minutes. I set my napkin on the table. I excused myself quietly, in the particular way that does not interrupt the conversation happening beside you. Nobody noticed. I am the kind of person nobody notices leaving. I have always been the kind of person nobody notices leaving. I walked to the hallway. I picked up the phone. David Kwan answered before the first ring finished. His voice had the precise, level tone of a man who has managed 14 urgent situations this week, and this is simply the 15th. Ms. Calloway, thank you for returning my call. I said. Of course, I apologize for the delay. I'm in Evanston. He said. I'll be brief. Our IP counsel has flagged a potential conflict between Luma's core workflow methodology and a patent held by Castor Dynamics, patent US 11-247-382. I understand your firm prosecuted it. I said. That's correct. He said. Then you're aware of the overlap. I said. I am. He said. We cannot close the Series A without IP clearance or a licensing agreement. The term sheet expires in 18 days. I said, I understand. I can have a conversation with Castor Dynamics on Monday. A licensing agreement in this category is not unusual. It's resolvable. He said, good. I appreciate the directness. Then he paused. He said, are you related to Ryan Calloway? I said, he's my brother. A short silence, the kind that has a shape to it. He said, then you've known about this. I said, since February. He said, why didn't you come forward earlier? I held the phone. The hallway was quiet. Through the wall, I could hear Ryan's voice rising slightly, the animated pitch of a man mid-story, mid-laugh, mid-everything. I said, because it was resolvable, and because I needed to think about how it was handled. Not for my benefit, but for his. David Kwan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your firm is going to need to recuse from the licensing negotiation. Conflict of interest. I said, I know. I already identified outside counsel. He said, of course you did. Something shifted in his voice, not warmth, exactly, but the particular register of a man recalibrating his estimation of who he is speaking to. He said, Monday then. I said, Monday. He said, Ms. Calloway. I said, yes. He said, your brother built something real. The methodology is genuinely innovative. The problem is not what he built, but what he built it on. I said, I know. He said, does he? I looked at the wall, at the family photographs my mother had arranged in matching frames in the hallway since before I could reach them. Ryan at 8, Ryan at 12, Ryan's high school graduation, Ryan's first company launch. Ryan. I said, he's about to. I walked back to the dining room. I pulled out my chair. I sat down. I picked up my fork. For exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I ate my dinner quietly, while the table moved around me. Then I set my fork down. I looked at Ryan. He was mid-sentence. Something about the product roadmap, something about the third quarter. He caught my eye. He smiled the reflex smile. I said, Ryan, I need to talk to you after dinner. Something in the way I said it changed the temperature of the table slightly. Not dramatically, the way temperature changes in a room when someone opens a window they had not opened before. My mother looked at me from the other end of the table. Ryan's smile did not disappear. He is too practiced for that. But his eyes asked a question his mouth had not yet decided to ask. He said, everything okay? I said, it will be. I want to talk to you before you drive home. That was all. I picked up my fork and I finished my dinner. Around me, the table resumed its warmth. The wine was passed, dessert arrived. My Aunt Carol told the story about Ryan at his 5th birthday party, the one she tells at every family gathering. He had organized the other children into teams and assigned them tasks. The room laughed. The laugh of people who have heard a story enough times that the laughing is as much about the ritual as the content. Ryan laughed too. He is generous like that. He laughs at his own stories. I ate my dessert, and I kept my face arranged in the expression it always wore at my parents' table, present, pleasant, slightly to the side of whatever was happening. Ryan found me in the kitchen after the other guests had begun to gather their coats. He leaned against the counter with his glass. He was still warm from the room, still carrying the glow of the evening. He said, "What's up?" I said, "Sit down." He raised an eyebrow. He sat on the stool by the island. The kitchen was quieter now. The sound of the dining room, moving toward goodbye, filtered through the door. I reached into my bag. I set 2 documents on the counter, between us, the patent filing and the memo. He looked at them, then he looked at me. He said, "What is this?" I said, "Read the first page of each." He read, and I watched him read. I watched the moment, the specific, exact moment, when his eyes found the claim language and found the product description and understood what they were sitting next to. His jaw shifted once, then he looked up. "Amy," he said, "my name the way you say a name, when you are reaching for something to hold on to." I kept my voice even. "The patent is owned by Castor Dynamics. My firm prosecuted it in 2021. Luma's core methodology implements claims 1 through 7. He stared at me. I said, "This is not a catastrophe. Licensing agreements are negotiated every day for exactly this situation. The Series A can still close. The timeline is tight, but workable. I've already spoken to Meridian." He said, "You've already spoken to Meridian?" I said, "They called me tonight. They found it through due diligence." His face did the thing faces do when the floor has shifted beneath them, and they're still deciding whether to acknowledge it. He said, "When did you know?" I said, "Since February." His voice came out quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" I held his gaze. I said, "Because I was thinking about how to handle it in a way that protected you, not the company, just you." He looked at the documents, at the claim language, at the memo. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I would never." I said, "I know, Ryan, I know you wouldn't." He was very still. Then he said, "How did I not find this?" I said, "Because prior art searches require someone who knows exactly what to look for. It is not obvious, unless you know how to read a patent claim in relation to a product architecture." He said, "And you do." I said, "It is what I do." He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not the public Ryan, not the charming Ryan, not the Ryan who filled rooms. Just a man sitting in his parents' kitchen on the night of his celebration dinner, looking at his sister and understanding something he had not understood before. He said, "I've never asked you what you actually do." The sentence landed the way certain sentences land, with a weight that is not loud but is not light either. I said, "You haven't really done that." He looked at the documents. He said, "I'm really sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "For this, and for the other thing." I looked at him. He said, "For not asking." I held that. I did not rush it, I did not minimize it, I did not say it was fine. Because it was not fine and he knew it was not fine. And the knowing was enough. Ryan's daughter, Lily, was 8 years old. She had been at the dinner, seated at the small table they set up in the corner for children at family gatherings, the table that appears from a closet somewhere and always tilts slightly to the left. She was a quiet child. Not shy, but quiet the way some children are quiet when they are paying more attention than the adults in the room have accounted for. She had spent most of the dinner drawing in a small spiral notebook she carried in her cardigan pocket. When the adults were moving toward coats and goodbyes, Lily had found me in the living room, where I was waiting for the room to clear. She climbed onto the couch beside me. She opened her notebook to a page she had been working on. She held it up. It was a drawing, a table, 2 people on one side, documents spread between them, and at the bottom, in the careful printing of a child who has been taught to take her time, Aunt Amy explaining something important. I looked at the drawing for a long time. Then I looked at Lily. She said, "You had papers." I said, "I did." She said, "Were they important?" I said, "They were." She thought about this. She said, "Is Daddy going to be okay?" I looked at her father's eyes in her face. I said, "Yes, he's going to be okay." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because he has people around him who know how to fix things." She considered that with the seriousness of a child who takes information literally and thinks it through completely. Then she said, "Are you one of those people?" I said, "I am." She nodded. Once, the nod of someone who has been given a satisfactory answer to a question they have been sitting with. She tore the page from the notebook. She held it out to me. She said, "You can have this one." I took it. I held it carefully. I said, "Thank you, Lily." She said, "You're welcome." She climbed off the couch. She went to find her coat. I sat with the drawing in my hands for a moment. 2 figures at a table. Documents between them. Aunt Amy explaining something important. I folded it carefully and I put it in my bag, next to the patent filing, next to the memo, next to Edmund's drafting compass that I carry the way some people carry photographs, not because it is useful in the conventional sense, but because it is the shape of a thing someone said to me at the right age, in the right garage, in the right light. Ideas are the only things they cannot take from you. He was right. He was really always right. Like they always say, the people who never ask what you do are always the most surprised to discover what you knew. Ryan built something real. David Kwan was right about that. The methodology is genuinely innovative. The problem was never what he built, but what he built it on. And the person who had been sitting at every family dinner for 9 years, while they said she does something with patents, was the only person in the room who understood exactly what that meant. Monday came the way Mondays come, after significant weekends, with the particular clarity of a week that knows what it has to do. I was at my desk at 7:15. The memo was open. The patent file was open. My contact list was open to Castor Dynamics. I called their general counsel at 8 o'clock. Her name was Jennifer Park. I had worked with her on the original prosecution. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Jennifer, it's Amy Calloway. I have a situation I need to walk you through." She said, "I'm listening." I walked her through it. The Luma platform, the claim language, the implementation, the Series A timeline, the Meridian situation. She listened the way good lawyers listen. Completely, without interrupting, without reaching for a conclusion before the facts had finished arriving. When I stopped speaking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is your brother's company." I said, "Yes." She said, "And you prosecuted the patent." I said, "Yes." She said, "Amy." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you want to handle this?" I said, "Licensing. Standard terms. Fair market rate. Royalty structure appropriate for a company at Series A stage. Nothing punitive." The implementation was unintentional. She said, "You're sure about that?" I said, "I'm sure." She was quiet again. Then she said, "You understand what a fair market rate license on this patent means for a Series A company?" I said, "I've run the projections. It's manageable. It will require a restructured cap table and a reallocation of the Series A proceeds. But it is manageable. Ryan's company survives this." Jennifer said, "You've already done their projections." My voice stayed even. I said, "I've done the math. I want to be clear about what I am and am not doing here. I am not advocating for my brother. I am the prosecuting attorney on your client's patent. My obligation is to Castor Dynamics. What I am telling you is that this is resolvable on terms that protect your client's rights, without destroying a company that built something genuine on a foundation they did not know they were borrowing." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll bring it to the board. I'll have an answer by Wednesday." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Amy." I said, "Yes." She said, "You didn't have to handle it this way." I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "Why?" I held the drafting compass in my palm, turned it over once. I said, "Because the right answer is still the right answer, regardless of who is sitting on the other side of the table." She said, "I'll call you Wednesday." She did call. The board approved the licensing terms on a Wednesday afternoon. Standard royalty, fair market rate, a structure that Ryan's company could carry alongside the Series A without being crushed by it. The term sheet was amended. The series closed 17 days after David Kwan first called me in my parents' hallway. Ryan called me the evening it closed. He was standing somewhere outside. I could hear the city behind him, the specific outdoor quiet of a man who has stepped away from a room of people to make a call. He said, "It closed." I said, "I know. Meridian's counsel sent me the confirmation this afternoon." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could have walked away from it. Referred it out entirely. Let someone else handle the licensing." I said, "I could have." He said, "Why didn't you?" I said, Because you needed someone who understood both sides completely. And I was the only person who did. He said, Amy. I said, Ryan. He said, I'm going to ask you something. I said, okay. He said, will you be our IP counsel? Not Calloway and Vance. You specifically. I know there are conflict considerations. I know it's complicated. But I want someone in the room who reads everything and tells me what they find, regardless of what I want to hear. I held the phone. I thought about 9 years of dinners, of what she does with patents, of glasses raised to the sun, who builds things. I thought about Edmund, about the compass, about irrevocably. I said, I'll need to structure it carefully. Clear disclosure. Documented independence. He said, of course. I said, and you'll need to come to my office. Not a phone call. My office. And you'll sit across from me, the way clients sit. And you'll listen, the way clients listen. He said, understood. I said, and at the next family dinner. He said, I will ask. I said, what? He said, what you actually do. I'll ask. And I'll listen to the whole answer. I held the phone for a moment. The office was quiet. The compass was in my hand. I said, that would be a good start. The next family dinner was 3 months later. On July, my parents' garden. A long table under the elm tree my father had planted the year Ryan was born. Fairy lights were strung from branch to branch. The particular kind of summer evening that arrives once a season and is immediately recognizable as the evening everyone will mention for years afterward. Ryan arrived with Lily and his wife, Claire, and a bottle of wine he had been saving for something worth opening. He set it on the table. He said to my father, Amy picked the Luma Patent Council. My father looked at him, then at me. He said, what do you mean? Ryan said, I mean Amy is my IP attorney. She's been handling the patent strategy for Luma since April. She's the reason the Series A closed. He said it plainly, without fanfare, the way you state a fact that you believe should have been obvious earlier and are simply now making visible. My father looked at me. I kept my expression neutral. He said, I didn't know that. I said, you didn't ask. A short silence followed, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that is simply making room for something to land properly. Then my father picked up the bottle Ryan brought. He looked at the label and set it back down. He cleared his throat and said, will you open it? He was looking at me, not Ryan me. I reached for the bottle and said, yes. I opened it and poured his glass first, then Ryan's, then my own. My father lifted his glass. He looked around the table. Lily drawing in her notebook, Claire passing the bread, my mother coming through the back door with the salad, Ryan watching me with the expression of a man who has recently learned that attention is a form of respect. And then, my father looked at me. He said, to the people in this family who know what they are doing. He paused and said, and to the ones we should have asked sooner. He held his glass toward me. I held mine toward him. We drank. Lily looked up from her notebook. She looked at me. She said, Aunt Amy. I said, yeah, Lily. She said, are you explaining something important again? I looked at my father, at Ryan, at this table, under this elm tree, in this evening light. I said, not tonight. Tonight, I'm just here. She nodded. She went back to her drawing. I picked up my wine. I looked at the garden, at the elm tree,